Hello and welcome to Pock and Rob. In today's video I am going to be doing a ReImagined. These have predominantly been around Beatles and Beatles related material, but not this time. I'm going to return to a subject that I have done several videos on already, and that is Iron Maiden. In my Iron Maiden ranking video, I placed the album Fear the Dark from 1992 third from bottom. Effectively the worst of the non-Blaze Bayley era albums. It's too long and it contains too many filler tracks that were becoming quite common in the early 90s as people extended their albums to start filling up a CD. Therefore, for my mind, it is absolutely ripe for a reimagining in this series. This was my first Maiden album as a Maiden fan. No Prayer for the Dying came out sometime before I started listening to them, but Fear the Dark was the first that I pretty much got instantaneous with release. And it is a bit of a disappointment. There are 12 tracks and it runs to nearly 60 minutes. Before I dive in and talk about what I'm keeping and culling, I would just remind you to subscribe if you've not already done so, click the thumbs up to like the video and the bell to receive notifications of future content. So what's up for consideration? Well, there's the original 12 tracks, but there are also a couple of non-LP B-sides that came from the band as well. Nodding Donkey Blues, which was written by all members of the band, and Roll Over Vic Vella, which is a parody of Roll Over Beethoven. Firstly, neither of them have anything in terms of real merit. We can assume that they're not in contention. So what am I culling from the 12? Well, so the first to go will be Childhood's End. Some good riffs on it, but it's and the solos are pretty decent, but it's really workmanlike. This would have been a good B-side, but it's filler. The next to go is Chains of Misery. I don't hate the track, but the chanting vocals, which must have seemed like a good idea at the time, they come across as faintly embarrassing. And Chains of Misery is going. And then lastly, probably the most maligned track on the entire 12-track album, and it's Weekend Warrior, the song that was written about football hooliganism. It's not a track that I think anybody really needed. So those three tracks alone lose about a quarter of an hour's worth of music and push this into 44-minute territory. Now, bearing in mind, in the 80s, Iron Maiden had pushed the boundaries quite significantly with things like Somewhere in Time and Power Slave being well over 50 minutes. The fact that we've got a 45-minute album means that we're in solid good vinyl territory. Of the 9 remaining tracks, I've given some significant thought to how I think the running order might be improved. It's really quite important in some albums that the running order really works in terms of the experience. And opening up side 1, it's Dickinson and Gurr's composition, Be Quick or Be Dead. It opens the original album. I can't see it being placed anywhere else that it better fits. It's the closest Maiden get to thrash metal. And it's a strong song. It was a strong song on the original album. It remains so, and it's my first track. On the original album, the follow-up track was From Here to Eternity, which I personally think is one of the weaker tracks of the album. I don't think it sits well as track 2. I think there's a much, much better track 2 lurking in the album, and for me, that's Dickinson and Murray's Judas Be My Guide, which might be my personal favourite from the entire record. I think Judas Be My Guide would have been a much better track 2, keeping a bit of that energy and high-octane attitude that Be Quick or Be Dead had already set in place. Third track, I have placed Dickinson and Gurr's Fear is the Key. I think this is a really, really good, solid Iron Maiden song. Track 4, I have placed a track that I've seen get very little love, and that's The Apparition. For me, it was probably one of the more forgettable tracks on Fear of the Dark, but I think that is just because it gets lost in the sea of 60 minutes worth of music that Fear of the Dark had become. I think it's quite a brooding song. I think there's distinct elements of the Peace of Mind era, and it's a co-write between Steve Harris and Yannick Gers. And then lastly, to close side one of the record, shifted from its innocuous position as track 3 to close a really quite now solid, strong side of vinyl, I've placed Afraid to Shoot Strangers from Steve Harris. So this was the song he wrote about the First Gulf War. And Maiden get a little bit acoustic to begin with. It then kicks in. It reminded me, even at the time, it reminded me of Infinite Dreams to a certain extent in the way that the song builds and is almost a ballad but not quite. Afraid to Shoot Strangers, it's come back into the set list over the years, so there's still some affection within the band for it. I think had it closed side 1, it would have ended a really solid vinyl side. So flipping the record onto side 2, and here is where I have placed Steve Harris's composition From Here to Eternity. It's not one of his stronger songs. It was a poor choice of single in my opinion, but I think it finds its place better here opening side 2 than it did being a letdown from Be Quick or Be Dead. Following up from that is another Steve Harris composition, which is The Fugitive. For me, this is almost the Son of the Prisoner from Number of the Beast. It's based around the story and the film of The Fugitive. Really, really strong song. Track 3 is my most controversial pick. So you already know that I have pulled Childhood's End, Chains of Misery and Weekend Warrior. And track 3 on side 2 was the closest to also being pulled, were it not for the fact that it would make the record a lot shorter. It's Wasting Love. I like Wasting Love. I think it's a really good ballad, and that's the problem with it. It's a ballad, a proper ballad. And Maiden weren't frightened to do things differently, as is proven on the excellent Dance of Death, and the final track being the acoustic Journeyman. This is almost the progenitor of Journeyman for me. It's written by Dickinson and Gers. It would have probably sat better, if we're really honest, on a second Bruce Dickinson solo album. It's got that Tattooed Millionaire feel to it, but I like the song, and I like the song more than the 3 that I culled. Which leaves the album closer as Fear of the Dark. Now, Wasting Love would have been a good album closer, but it has to be Fear of the Dark. And I've ragged on this track a little bit in previous videos. I don't think it's one of the best title tracks ever, but it is unquestionably the strongest song on Fear of the Dark. Even though I prefer Judas Be My Guide, even though I prefer Be Quick or Be Dead and Afraid to Shoot Strangers, the strongest song, the most Maiden-esque song on the whole album is Fear of the Dark. And I can't imagine the album finishing any other way than with that track. It should have been the second single. They should have just been brave enough to put that out rather than the From Here to Eternity. So that concludes my reimagined Fear of the Dark. Side 1, Be Quick or Be Dead, Judas Be My Guide, Fear is the Key, The Apparition, Afraid to Shoot Strangers. And then on side 2, From Here to Eternity, The Fugitive, Wasting Love, and Fear of the Dark. That, for me, would be a really solid Maiden album. Not top drawer. I don't think the material is anywhere close to Power Slave. I don't think it's close to Somewhere in Time, if I'm honest, or Peace of Mind, which are my least favourite 80s Maiden albums. But it would have been a much, much better album. And who knows? Who knows? If that had gone out as their 9th album, then it may well have been that Bruce Dickinson didn't get fed up and leave. And we may never have had the Blaze Bayley era that is so maligned. But that's the whole point of the ReImagined series. It's the fact that it could have led to something different in the future. Let me know in the comments below what you think would be your ideal pick of a single vinyl album from the Fear the Dark sessions. I'll be back in a week with another video. But before I go, I'd remind you to subscribe, like, and hit the bell. I will see you in a week. Thanks for watching.